So hi everyone and welcome to Conversations for Success, virtual chats with student affairs. Remember to join the conversations Wednesday at 1, check social media for upcoming events. Today's conversation is successfully learning online, myths, facts, and expectations. And we're joined with Loie from Academic Integrity and Matt from Student Advocacy and Case Management. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. These conversations are being recorded, as you heard from the prompt. As such, we have you all muted, and the presenters will remain unmuted because we've given the university permission to have our recording and post it online later for other students to access. Since you're all muted, please use the chat by clicking on the speech bubble at the bottom of the window to open the chat window to the right of your screen. The goal of this program is to be conversational, so ask questions when you think of them, and we'll do our best to bring them up to the presenters and answer them as the presentation is going. And finally, be respectful in the chat. As stated before, you're being muted and everything needs to go through the chat. Those who are disrespectful will be removed, and the way we have these programs set up, you will not be able to rejoin after. You'll have to find the recording online at a later time. So on that note, thank you all again for joining us, and I will hand it off to Loie and Matt.
Thanks, Zach. Thank you everyone for attending this session on what we feel is a really important topic for students that are coming into their first semester online. Even if you are a returning student, maybe there are some things that you can pick up as well in terms of making this a successful semester for you. My name is Loie Gervais. I'm the Academic Integrity Coordinator at the university. So I do a lot of presentations and workshops, developing resources to help students be successful in their transition and in their work at the university as they continue. And I'll let Matt introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Carvell. I'm a student advocate at the university. My role is usually to help students facing difficulties with the bureaucracy, and a big part of that is helping students go through the academic misconduct procedure, which is normally about 25% of my workload, but has ballooned to about half my workload over this summer. So we'll be talking a little bit about that in this presentation.
So in terms of what we will be covering today, the first thing that we want to touch on is what are some of the myths about online learning. So there are some things that you may not expect with learning online at the university, even if you have done online classes in the past. The second thing we're going to talk about is specifically academic integrity expectations. Another way of thinking about this is what are the expectations for completing your work successfully at the University of Manitoba, because understanding these is really key to you being successful, especially as a student studying online. Next, we're going to talk about what are some common pitfalls when it comes to online studies, and these are pulled directly from situations that Matt and myself, but primarily Matt, has seen over this past semester of shifting studies online. And lastly, because we know that writing online exams is a big area of confusion for many students, we're going to end with some tips for that. So going straight into myths about online learning, the first myth is that online classes are easier. So in fact, the workload for a class is the same regardless of how it's delivered. So whether it's an in-person class or an online class, it's still going to be a university level class. In fact, there's more reading in online classes. So depending on if you like reading, if reading is easy for you, if this is how you learn, it could be actually more challenging in some regards. There's also the potential for challenges with technology, as I'm sure many of you have already experienced, even at the high school level or at a previous institution or workplace. And there's just more potential for miscommunication. So whether that's misunderstanding the expectations of the instructor for completing your academic work, or misunderstandings with other students, especially with things related to group work or discussing course content. The second myth about online learning is that online classes are self-paced. So how it's going to work at the University of Manitoba is that some instructors will release their content ahead of time, so you'll be able to log into the course and see everything right off the bat. But others will release content at different times. So it's not the student that sets the pace for the course, it's actually the instructor. This is really important to note because to be successful in your studies, you'll have to keep up with the pace of the class. If you really have challenges and you aren't able to keep on top of it, you can end up cutting corners, and that's where a lot of students run into issues when they run out of time. And so this can lead to many problems later, which Matt is going to talk about. The third myth is that you're anonymous in an online class. So even though you're not going to be physically in a class this semester, your instructor is tracking both the quality and the quantity of your participation. So actually, they can likely have better tabs on you. They can know more about their students if they're in an online class than in an in-person class. So this is really important to note because you will still need to participate actively in an online class, and you're still accountable, even though you might feel anonymous. And if you don't actively participate in the class, not only does this hurt your learning, but it can also hurt your grade as well. The fourth myth here is that you can access your instructor any time of day or night. So especially because we're thinking, okay, everyone's online, everyone's at home, we have nowhere to go, I can get a hold of my instructor whenever I want to. Most instructors will give you a time frame that you can expect to hear back from them. So this can be between 24 to 48 hours that they will respond to your email. But every instructor is going to be different. And every instructor also has different life circumstances, right? So some of them have children at home. Some of them are teaching multiple classes. Some might only be teaching one. And no instructor is going to be available all the time. So if you have a question, you need to leave enough time for your instructor to answer. So this means if you have a question about an assignment, not to ask it 2 days before the assignment's due, but to ask it well ahead of time so that you can also take what your instructor says and then apply it to your assignment. And then the last here is that an online class is more informal than an in-person class. So an online class has to be treated the same as a regular in-person class because it is the same. They're both the same course, they're just being delivered in a different way. So the same expectations for the type of work, the quality of it that you submit is going to apply in an online class. So a lot of students have the misunderstanding that the same rules don't apply, whether it's discussing exam answers with another student or not citing and referencing during an open book exam or any of these types of things. So it's really important to note that not only can your instructor track academic misconduct, so breaking of rules more easily online, they can also, they do have the same expectations that they would have in an in-person class for you to demonstrate academic integrity in all of your work. So what do we mean when we talk about academic integrity? So this is something that a term that you may be familiar with, or you may have less familiarity of it based off of your previous experience. But the principal message here is that academic integrity is a commitment to honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. So these are the behaviors that you are expected to demonstrate in your academic work. And how you demonstrate them will be a little bit different in every course because there will be different expectations for each course based off of what the instructor wants you to demonstrate, wants you to learn in their course. So most important sort of take-home message with this is that these expectations for academic integrity, they apply online just the same as they do to in-person classes. So why is academic integrity so important? The university takes academic integrity extremely seriously because it is considered to be at the foundation of everything that we do at the university. So whether you are a student studying for a class, whether you're writing an exam, if you're doing a chemistry lab, or a computer science assignment, if you are doing research as a researcher, if you are a staff member like myself or my colleague Matthew, we are all expected to demonstrate these values in our work because this reflects on the reputation of the university. So when we show these values in our work, it gives credibility to our work. It means that people can trust the quality of the work that comes out of people who graduate from the University of Manitoba and people who are a part of the University of Manitoba community. And in this way, we're also showing respect for the ideas of others. So everything that we do at the university is going to build on the work of others that came before us. So when we're thinking about showing these values of honesty and trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage, this is helping us to develop good practices that are going to be valuable in the workplace, in our broader communities, as well as in the classroom, or in the online classroom, as the case may be for this semester. And then sort of a last point here is that it's really important that you focus on how to demonstrate these values in your work so that you can be successful in your studies and avoid academic misconduct. So I'm going to pass it over to Matthew now.
Okay, thank you, Loie. So just reminding everyone, if you have questions as we're going forward in this, please comment in the chat. If there's anything you're not sure about, that's the place to do it. We're gonna have a few just engaged activities coming up in a little bit. So I really encourage you to answer in the chat function. So what I have here is some policies and procedures that directly work with academic integrity, specifically the academic misconduct procedure. So that outlines what's expected of students in the classroom setting when it comes to exams, assignments, and their own work. And it gives the rules and regulations surrounding these type of misconduct, how it goes forward, who has authority, and things like that. I don't expect people to go and read this. It's not interesting or engaging reading, but it is very important. And I would recommend that everyone at least peruse through what's expected in terms of academic integrity, because it gives you a good idea of what the university is talking about. Because what we're going to discuss a lot here is if there's a difference between your interpretation and the university's, we're going to go with the university's interpretation of the policy, not yours. And so making sure you're on the same page is extremely important. So Loie, if you don't mind going ahead. So when it comes to online learning, there are some issues, especially because a lot of us, not just yourself as students, but faculty members may not be used to it and may not be familiar with it. And they're going to be learning on the fly just as you will be in some respects. And so on the student end of things, sometimes people feel that, they're anonymous and that there's no accountability. So that means they can post inappropriate things in a discussion on Zoom, or that they can misbehave in a class during a meeting by having inappropriate pictures, or misbehaving because the prof doesn't know who they are and they don't have their student number or anything like that. Those type of activities are unacceptable, and they fall under our non-academic misconduct policy, and they do have serious repercussions. On the other end of things, it can be technology. If you're in a household or you're renting an apartment and you have 4 or 5 other roommates or a family, and you're all using the internet at the same time, things can get slow, and that can cause challenges, in the middle of an exam or a lecture. And there definitely are situations there. So knowing what to expect is very important. One of the big issues, it happens in person classes as well, but it's confusion about expectation. What exactly does open book exams mean? Can you search online? Can you Google something in the middle of the exam and go on Wikipedia? Is it just your own notes? What's the expectation there? One thing I'd really recommend, and you're going to hear it from me a lot throughout this presentation, is talk to your professor. Ignorance isn't an excuse in these situations. I didn't know isn't going to cut it. If you don't know, reach out to your professor. They want to help you. They want to see you be successful. So please reach out. And then perception that the same rules don't apply. If you're writing an exam online, some people feel that, well, I can just copy and paste from Wikipedia because it's what I want to say. I don't have to cite it. The same rules that would apply to an online exam as they do for an in-person exam. The same rules apply to online learning assignments. All of it, the same rules apply. And it's very important that you understand what those rules are. So going to the next slide. These are kind of the 6 major forms. They're not exclusive, but the 6 major forms of academic misconduct at the university as outlined in our policy and procedures. we're going to focus mainly on the top row of plagiarism, cheating, and inappropriate collaboration, as those are perhaps the more pressing issues when it comes to online learning. So the last three, duplicate submission, impersonation, academic fraud, I'm not going to touch on really too much, but we're going to go over like what is plagiarism. I can give you some examples and some scenarios. Same with cheating, inappropriate collaboration. And if you feel your opinion is different, if you don't agree with what I'm saying, please speak up in the chat. I'm happy to have this discussion with people because it's good thing to get on the same page as everyone. So go to the next slide there, Loie. So let's start off with a scenario here. Sarah is taking a class with an open book exam, and while studying for the practice questions, Sarah decided to copy and paste Wikipedia definitions into her notes. During the final exam, Sarah looked through her notes and used these Wikipedia definitions as her answers. Since it's an open book exam and she doesn't remember where she got the information from, she doesn't cite it. Is this a problem? So just, if anyone wants to jump in the chat, like feel free. I'll give it a couple seconds here. So I see someone chatting there, like, yes, I think it may be a problem. If anyone else wants to jump in, I'll just give it a few more seconds. So someone's asking what citing exactly means. That's giving credit. So there are a variety of ways to cite. Citing can be like through like APA style. That's like putting in brackets saying, Wikipedia, I should say it's biology, like natural selection, where you got it, close brackets. So the professor or whoever's marking it knows exactly where you got it from, because it's not your original idea. You didn't come up with the theory of natural selection. If you're taking someone's words, you have to make sure that you give credit for. You're giving someone's ideas, you got to give credit to them. And so there are a lot of ways to cite. There's a lot of different formats, and it's important you talk to your prof to know which kind it is. And so in this scenario, like, it is a problem. Because just copying from Wikipedia doesn't show that Sarah understands the material. The prof isn't interested in what someone wrote on Wikipedia about it. They're interested in how Sarah perceives the issue, how they can interpret it, and how they can take the information. So what's really important is that, like, I'm not going to say you can always use online resources on exams. Talk to your profs about what their expectations are. Some may say, no, just use my notes. I don't want to see anything from online on your exam. Some may say, sure, but make sure you cite it. And so if you are pulling things from Wikipedia or, like various journals or any other website, and you're putting those into your notes and it's an open book exam, make sure your notes are cited. Because if you write, 30 pages, 50 pages, 60 pages of notes, and you're just flipping through them in the exam, you're not going to remember where you got all this information from. So you have to do that beforehand, and you have to be prepared in your notes when you do that, so that come exam time, if you're allowed to and your prof said that you can go ahead and use that information, that's easy for you to then say, okay, here it is, Wikipedia, here's the information, there we go. So it's a lot of preparation, and it's not something you can do the night before. You have to be doing this as you go, because you may miss something. It's very similar to writing an essay. Don't cite everything at the end, because you may have to, you may forget where you found things. So I see a good question in the chat. Do we have to cite from the prof's notes? Usually no. But one of the things, like, I don't want to speak for every professor. What someone says in your biology class may be different from what they say in your psych class. And so talk to your professor about it, because maybe if it's verbatim, like word for word, they may want you to cite it, because what they're usually interested in is how you interpret the idea. It's not necessarily that you're capable of copying and pasting words right into an answer. So I know it's not a great answer, but talk to your profs about it. At the beginning of the class, just say, hey, for exams, I just want to know, do we have to cite your notes for the exams if I'm using those words? If they say yes, you got an answer. If they say no, you know the answer is. And if they don't respond, follow up. Like, the onus is on you. The prof isn't going to be the one that has the consequences. You are as a student. So Loie, will go on to the next slide, please.
I'll just add one thing to that,
Thank you.
which is if you're wondering whether you need to cite from your prof's notes, basically you should be thinking about what shows the greatest amount of learning. So that's actually the purpose of why we're being assessed at the university level anyway, is your instructor wants to know what you know about something. So your instructor doesn't generally want to know what they have said themselves. So when you're thinking about whether to cite your instructor's notes, think about, well, how do I show what I've learned? And it's probably from showing your understanding of what your instructor has said, and your own research on the topic, as opposed to what the instructor has said themselves. So hopefully that's a helpful question if you face that situation.
So we have a slide here just dedicated to plagiarism. We've talked a little bit about it so far, so I won't belabor the point too much. But the idea of plagiarism is taking someone else's ideas or words and using them as if they are your own. So typically when we're talking about plagiarism, we're talking about essays or labs or things like that. Less exams, but with online learning and some of the pitfalls associated with it, it is easier now to directly take information from a resource and use it on your exam. And so the classic example is like an essays. You know, if for instance you found a really good quote, but you only changed up a couple words on it, do you still have to cite it? Yes. Like, it's still not your idea. It's still not your own like words. It's someone else's idea. And even if you do a great job of changing the words, that's still their idea. And so you still have to cite it. And I'm not an expert on citation. Like, Loie is much better at it than I am. We have a lot of resources at the end here. If you are, confused about citation, if you haven't done MLA, APA, Chicago, like Harvard, McGill, like any of these different citation styles, please reach out to our Academic Learning Center. They have great presentations online. Some of them are readily available at all times. Some of them are more specific, like they'll do workshops as the semester gets closer, and they'll do a great job of teaching you and helping you work on it. Our librarians will help you work on the papers. We have writing tutors that will help you with citation. Like, there are a lot of resources out there to help you work on it, because like anything, citation's a skill. You don't just get good at it. It takes practice and years of learning. And you'll see professors that are often struggling with it and having to keep up to date with all the rules, because it is difficult, but take advantage of the resources. And so like and especially if you're coming from a different institution, you have to abide by the rules of like Western institutions, and that is to always cite. If you're not sure, it's almost better to cite it just to be safe. Loie, if you want to jump in here, you're a little bit more of an expert on plagiarism than I am.
Well, I think we can just maybe go over some of these tips for how to avoid plagiarism. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to cover this, Matt? Or do you
I'll go ahead. So like the first one here is the most important one. Like, when I work with students that have been accused of plagiarism, it's usually one of two things. It's A, lack of understanding, or B, time management issues. And time management issues is like a huge issue that comes up with these type of situations. If you write your paper the night before, mistakes are going to happen. Those mistakes can be small mistakes that like you just didn't include all the information you wanted to, or they can be big mistakes where you forgot a lot of your citations. And so, be proactive, be on top of it, start your papers early, proofread it, do multiple drafts, like, and cite as you go. Don't just do it all at the end. What I was always taught, which I thought was like just one of those like eye-opening events, was one of my professors said, like, when he's writing a paper, and this is someone like a PhD, written books, like he knows what he's doing, he never has his Microsoft Word document open at the same time of a source. So if he's reading a journal, he's going through it and he thinks, oh, this is great, he's not writing into his essay right then and there. His essay is closed. He has his notebook and he's writing it in like his own unique shorthand. So it'd be like arrows and stars and like short words. And then he'll take that notepad and then he'll use that to write his essay, and the notepad is cited throughout. That way, it's impossible for him to be copying directly from the source that he used. It'll be in his own unique words, and he can still then cite it as he goes. So you're not having that issue where you're like, oh, I just copied and pasted in now, I'll change it later, and then you forget. And that unintentional plagiarism, we sometimes call it, is still plagiarism. It's up to you to make sure that your paper is meeting all the requirements and the rules that the university expects. When you are copying directly, because sometimes someone's just said something so perfect and you don't know how to change it, you have to use quotations. You shouldn't be quoting like whole pages, but if there's a couple lines here and there in someone's work that you're like, I'm never going to make this better, or every time I paraphrase it, it's just too close, put it in quotation. That's fine. And this helps people know what's your own work versus like what's paraphrased versus what's your own analysis. Depending on the style, you have to have full references with your notes at the end of your paper, so where you found everything. But if something's in your reference list, it should also be cited in your paper, because that means you used it somewhere. The last two, so it is up to you. The university isn't going to necessarily like give you a second chance on something that's plagiarized. They're not going to let you rewrite it. You're a university student, or if you're going to your first term, you're soon to be a university student. It's on you to know the rules. And if you don't, reach out to me after this and say, I don't know where to go. I don't know how to cite. I'll point you in the right direction. I'll get you connected with the people that do know how to teach this, and I'll help you improve your skills on it. But please reach out. And when I say reach out in September, not in December, 2 days before your paper is due. At that point, everyone is stressed and no one's going to be able to help you out. And then lastly, especially when you're studying for exams, we talked about this in the example from before, primarily use your professor's notes. Try to avoid going too much online. It can be really helpful to learn some things from online, but if you are taking that information and putting it into your notes, cite your notes. You don't want to end up in a situation where you're copying answers onto the exam from an online resources. That's plagiarism. Even if it's an exam, it's still plagiarism. So we have another scenario here, kind of going along with a little bit of plagiarism again. So Anna is having trouble during an exam. She has answered every question except for one long answer, which is worth 25% of her mark. As it is an open book exam, Anna opens her Chegg account for help and sees someone has posted the exam. Anna decides just to look at the first portion of the answer to help get herself started. Is this a problem? For those who don't know what Chegg is, it's an online resource primarily for the sciences that can have some learning tools on it that is sometimes promoted by certain professors. So again, people can go in the chat here. Is this an issue? Like, it's an open book exam, so that means like they can look at anything, right? So I'll give a general rule of thumb here, just because I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Do not look at Chegg during an exam. You should not be opening your internet browser except for Aurora, except for like whatever you're using. If it's CrowdMark, Aurora, UMLearn, whatever, that should be the only thing open on your computer during an exam. You should not be going to any other websites at all, especially Chegg. That type of information is tracked and checked, and don't be posting exams on Chegg. This is one of the main things I've seen all summer. It's been one of the biggest issues that we've seen. And we'll talk about consequences later, but there are serious consequences. So if someone posts an exam on Chegg, that's their issue. That's a mistake on their part that they should not be doing. Do not utilize it, because that's not letting the professor know what you know. If you're struggling with a question, you're supposed to get the mark you earn, you work at, you deserve. Looking at Chegg and finding how someone else did it isn't showing the prof what you know. It's showing them what you can take from someone else. And yes, I see someone here mentioning that people copy the wrong answers from Chegg. Yeah, that does happen, and Chegg will also provide information to the universities that ask if they require it. So like, do not open Chegg during an exam. Like, keep that closed. Someone asked about secure browser. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I assume most people use Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, one of the things like that. I would just recommend, like, if you do have your notes on a computer, like, just make sure you have it. Like, if you can print it off, that's great. If not, like, just make sure that you only have that one internet browser open. Don't be looking at Google. Don't be looking at Wikipedia. Nothing like that. How will it track? Chegg provides all that information. I don't know how it works. I'm not the most computer savvy, but Chegg tracks everyone's information, and they'll tell the institutions about this. And like I said, just do not open it. You will get caught, and there are serious consequences to it. And so in this case, Anna may have only looked at one small part of it, but in this situation, she's not showing what she knows. She's showing what her and someone else know on the final exam. And that's not fair to the other students that are going through the exam and showing what only they know. If anyone else has any questions, go ahead, Loie.
Oh, sorry, Matt. Didn't mean to interrupt. This goes back to that principle earlier that I mentioned of what shows the highest degree of learning, right? So going to Chegg or another, note sharing website and using somebody else's work in order to answer an exam question is not showing a high degree of learning. And you have to think about, would you do that in an in-person exam? Would you go on your phone and look at a note sharing website? You wouldn't, right? You would get pulled out of the exam. You get suspended for the university for that. So that's just important to keep in mind as well, because there was this question about how the U of M can track. So I mean, one thing is that instructors, if you found an answer on Chegg, another student probably found it too. So if more than one student submit very similar answers, that's one way the university can track it, as well as through UM Learn when you write exams. Instructors can also view how long students take on certain questions, how long they spend on certain pages too. And there is a program, I don't know if it's going to be used throughout the whole university, but I know it's being used for sure in parts of the university, that is like a lockdown browser that doesn't allow you to look at anything else outside of the browser where you have the exam viewed.
And so jump on that point. So I went to law school at the University of Manitoba, and we used our laptops during all our final exam. This was 5 years ago. And we wrote on a program called ExamSoft, which does that. It just shuts down everything except for a word processing unit, and then it uploads. But Loie made a point, like, would you check your phone during an exam? All of my exams in law school are open book exams. I could literally bring in the textbook and my entire year's worth of notes to the final exam, and that was perfectly fine. But if I pulled my phone out, done, like, that's immediately over. Like, it's the same thing for online classes. So just commenting on this last question here, at this point, no, you can use whatever browser that you require. Just keep an eye out at the university if there are any changes, or if your specific department requires different things. Some departments are requiring different solutions to online learning. So, maybe ASPR requires one thing, but science requires another. Even within science, maybe chem is different than bio, which is different than physics. So just keep an eye out on that and read the syllabus closely, because that information should be in there. So the next one we'll talk about is inappropriate collaboration. So that's working together. In some aspects, working together is great. You can learn a lot by working with someone, by studying together. On certain assignments, you'll be allowed to work together. Some faculties really encourage it. Like ASPR is really well known for doing a lot of together type of projects. But when it comes to exams, there's a very hard and fast line that you should not be communicating with others. And we'll give some examples of this. But just imagine you're in separate silos, just like you would be in an in-person exam. You have your desk, you have your dividers. At-home exams are the exact same thing. You should have those mental dividers, like physical dividers if you need it, but it's important to know what the expectations are here. Someone asked a quick question here. It really depends on the classes. I can't say every exam will be. Check your syllabus for the classes you're taking. That information should be in there. Some will, some won't. I really don't know.
You'll know from your instructor whether it's an open book exam.
It should be in the syllabus for any class that you take.
Yeah.
So the big thing for avoiding inappropriate collaboration, and this isn't just for exams, it's for assignments, is know the expectations. Like some faculties, like I was saying, are very collaborative, and they'll say, go ahead, work together. Some will say, you don't even talk to someone else about any of these classes or any of these assignments, sorry. This is yours, and I only want to know what you know. Like, they're not interested in what you and your friend can come up together. So for computer science, they're not interested in what you and your friend can code together. They want to know how you can code. And so it's important to keep those silos up. And that goes both ways. It's not just, for instance, if Loie and I are working on a project together and I'm struggling because I'm the dumb one here and Loie's the very smart one and I can't figure it out. And I say, Loie, please send me your assignment. I just need to look at it, see what you did. Please just help me. And Loie sends it to me because she's a good friend and she wants to see me succeed. And it's very nice of her. Loie will get in as much trouble as I am because she enabled it. She allowed it. And so that's important here. I see a couple questions. I'll get through this slide and I'll answer them there. And so don't give out your copies of your work to other people. Keep them to yourselves and don't let someone else change your work. So again, Loie's probably a much better writer than I am. And maybe I'm having trouble with some sections of my paper. It's okay to ask someone for general help, to read it, to go over it, maybe give you some feedback, but be sure that person knows how to give proper feedback. Because what sometimes people think is, oh, I'll just change these few sentences up for my friend just because they don't sound that good. Now that's no longer your work. That's you and your friends work together. Loie telling me, hey, these sentences are the best. Think about them, fix them up. That's great. That's appropriate feedback. I'll go change the words myself. But her changing the words, that's a step too far over the line. Loie, is there anything you want to jump on that?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that relates to Mohammed's question here. Can we get help from librarians for individual assignments? So any kind of university support, whether it be a librarian, a writing tutor, a writing instructor that's giving a workshop, myself, Matthew, an academic advisor, receiving help and support from us, we have been trained in how to help and support students in a way that doesn't violate the academic integrity expectations of the university. So you can be confident that if you go to these university supports, we will provide you the help that is appropriate. So going to see a librarian for help with citations is not inappropriate collaboration, for example.
Yeah, so perfect. And just to answer the last question there, in how many classes you can take per semester, I recommend talking to the advisors in your home faculty. So if you're in U1, contact the first year center and they can help you with that to kind of manage your classes and figure it all out. So we got a couple scenarios here. We'll go through them, not light term speed, but we'll go through them a little quicker just because we got a few other things to get to. So this is something that we've seen quite a bit is Michael's home internet connection was giving him issues all term. He would lose Wi-Fi at random times. He tried contacting his internet provider, but they couldn't do anything. Leading up to the final exam, Michael decides to ask his friend Julia if he can write his exam at her place. Julia is in the class with Michael, but agrees to let him write the exam at her place. Is this a problem? I'll give people a couple seconds here.
A very emphatic yes.
So I would say it is a problem, but it's more leading to a problem. So if you do have internet connections, like that may happen. Like I can totally emphasize with that type of situation. But if you're in a situation where your internet's just been really bad all term and you have to go somewhere else to write it, don't go somewhere else where a person living there is writing the same exam as you, because it can lead to issues. The university can see your IP addresses. They know where your home address is. And if those don't match up, that's going to cause them issues. Or they can see that 4 people that don't live at the same address have the same IP address. That's weird. Wonder what's happening there. It's not an issue in and of itself, but I include it because I'd be very careful if this situation is happening to you. So, if I'm having an issue with an exam and my Wi-Fi is really bad and I have to go write somewhere, and Loie and I are in the same class, well, maybe I shouldn't ask Loie. Maybe I should ask Zach instead, because Zach and I aren't in the same class. And then as well as be proactive. And so what I mean by that is tell your professor, hey, I'm having issues with my internet. I'm going to be writing at a different place. So if this stuff doesn't match up, this is the reason why. It's not an issue in and of itself, but it can lead to issues. And you don't know your friends. Like maybe they're freaking out in the exam. They're like, hey, just Loie, let me look at your paper. Let me look at your exam real quick. I'm having trouble with these questions. Please, please, please. It can lead to issues. Just protect yourself and be careful. So we'll go to the next one. Francois has done very well in Stats 2000 throughout the term. Leading up to the final exam, he has been tutoring his friend Namdi. During the final exam, Namdi texts Francois asking for help with multiple choice questions. Francois doesn't realize that Namdi has a different version of the exam, but gives him advice for answering some of the questions. Is this a problem? So very clearly, I'll just kind of move ahead. Yes, this is a big problem. For one, like Namdi's not getting the answers here on their own. They're using someone else, and so they no longer are showing the professor what they know on their own. They're showing the professor what them and Francois know together, and that's not fair to other students doing it together, and they're not showing their work. The other issue is just more, there are different exams out there, and you don't know what exam your friend has, and you shouldn't be telling them these answers. You shouldn't have your phone on you. That should be put away just like you would for a regular final exam. But it's the same thing. Francois is in as much trouble as their friend because they're providing the answers in this scenario. They're enabling them. If they didn't respond and Namdi went through it and they said, I hate Francois. They're an idiot. What a terrible friend. I'm never going to talk to them again. But then they finished the exam on their own. Nothing would happen. But because Francois enabled it, they're now both in the same situation. So it's an issue for both of them in this type of case. So I know Loie mentioned at the beginning, one of the pillars of academic integrity, and one of them is courage. And signing up to your friend and saying, sorry, I can't help you. That's courageous. It's tough. It's difficult. And they may be angry at you in that moment. They may be angry at you in that second there. But ultimately, you have to respect yourself and your work, and you have to be able to say no in these situations. So we'll go to scenario 5.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Good point, Matt.
So we'll go to scenario 5 here. Ariel has received a take-home exam for her class and she has 48 hours to complete it. Since the exam asks her some questions related to a topic she wrote about earlier in the term, she answers the questions by taking sentences from that paper and combines it with information she copied from the textbook into her notes. She submits her exam just in time for the 48-hour deadline. Is this a problem? So this is a pretty nuanced one, and it's on one of the topics we didn't go as much in depth on, but that's duplicate submission. Yes, self-plagiarism is another term for that. Self-plagiarism is tricky. Some profs would be okay with it. Some profs would be like, oh, whatever, you have the paper, yeah, go ahead, no big deal. It shows me that you know the material. So it comes back to the idea of talk to your professors. Don't go ahead and just be like, I can do it, I know everything, I'm just gonna go ahead and submit this as is. All it takes is an email like a week or two out from the exam to say, hey, I'm if I wrote this paper in this class, if it comes up, can I use this material again? If your prof says, no, please don't, I'd rather you show new information, then you know their answer. If they say, go ahead, great, go ahead and do it. You have an email showing what you can do. So it's one of those things where talking to your professors is like the key thing in these situations. Taking notes directly from the textbook is an issue in this scenario, as if you are, it should be cited and it should be quoted if it's direct quotes, and if it's paraphrased, it should be cited accordingly as well, because what you're trying to show is your understanding of the material. The textbook writer clearly understands material very well. They wrote a textbook on it. They know this stuff backwards and forwards, and just putting their words into it doesn't show that you actually can comprehend the material or that you can analyze it or use it in a way. You want to build on it and use it as like a base, but not just as your sole answer. And like I said, if you are going to use it at all, you should be citing it, especially for these 48-hour take-home exams when you have an extended period of time. My experience has always been that the longer time you have an exam or longer time you have to write something, the higher the expectation is for citation. And so if you have 48 hours, you should be citing things throughout, especially if it's verbatim, but paraphrase as well. And everyone can say hi to Loie's kitty.
Sorry. The cat pressed some keys. All right.
Scenario 6.
Sorry about the cat.
And just for the person that had a question there, I would just recommend really strongly to talk to your advisors and your home faculty, whatever that may be, reach out to them. That's a question that they can definitely help you with. So last one here, Eric and his sister Desiree are both taking Math 1240 together. They live together and often take the same classes in order to study together and save money on textbooks. They studied together as usual for the Math 1240 final. During the final, they wrote their exams in their bedroom, separate from one another. Is this a problem? So no, it isn't. Like, people have siblings in the same class as them. Like, the university is not prohibiting you from taking classes with your siblings or your friends or anything like that. It's just one of those things, like, be careful. Make sure that you both understand, you and your sister, brother, cousin, whoever you're living with, if you're both in the same class, so you understand, hey, we're not talking to one another. And it doesn't hurt to email your prof just to give them a heads up, so that if they see IP addresses that are the same from maybe you have a different last name than an individual that you're living with, that they know why and they expect it. But in and of itself, this isn't an issue. It's perfectly fine to write with like a sibling, a partner, or something like that, especially if that's your home in the first place. But just be cognizant of the situation and how it may perceived by an outside party. And just be very careful, like separate bedrooms, like don't write at the same kitchen table across from one another, like go to separate rooms if you can. So the last slide that I'll talk about here before giving it back to Loie's consequences. So I've hopefully given you an idea about why you shouldn't be doing this and why you should have academic integrity in your work, along with some tricky scenarios. But I guess, the real deterrent here is the consequences, and they're serious, especially when it comes to final exams. If it's upheld in a final exam, I can guarantee you that you'll get an F and a notation on your transcript that will be up there for probably 4 or 5 years. You'll be suspended from courses in that program. So if it's science, all science classes, arts, all arts classes. If it's a science course, but you're an art student, from both of them for up to a year. So this can have serious repercussions. If you're an international student, that can really delay your studying, especially if you can't take any classes in your program. You may have to take classes in another program to fulfill your study requirements. If you're anyone, that's going to delay your graduation if you can't take the core requirements you need. And so these are extremely serious. They take it just as seriously as they would if this was in person. If you were passing notes in a final, it's the exact same thing. So they're coming back to some of the myths that Loie talked about. In class, online, it's the exact same expectations when it comes to academic integrity. And so it's extremely important that you maintain academic integrity. And if you're not sure, that you reach out. So I'll pass it back to Loie here.
Yeah, so hopefully going over some of these scenarios was helpful. I get the sense that it was, because there's lots of questions that are coming out, which is great. That's the whole purpose of having this series of online presentations and conversations, is really to answer any questions that can help you. And I know you're all thinking about starting your semesters on the right foot, which is great. So we've talked a lot about these situations you can face in your online classes. So now we're going to talk specifically about online exams briefly before we end. So how are online and in-person exams similar? Well, we've kind of driven home the point that they are still exams. They're still taken seriously. You can face consequences regardless of if the exam is online. So you still have to study and prepare. In some cases, you have to study and prepare more. I mean, if it's an open book exam, you're being asked to apply a lot more in depth the information beyond just what you might be expected to recall from memory in an in-person exam. You have to maintain the same academic integrity standards. It's really important to read and follow the instructions carefully in both an online and in-person exam, but especially an online exam because it's a new environment for a lot of us. And in both cases, the exam is timed and your activity is tracked. So what are the expectations for an online exam? As I already mentioned, the questions are really intended to get you to apply and analyze. So rather than just repeating something from memory, you really are usually being asked to show your deeper understanding of something. When you're writing an online exam, you can access your class materials generally, unless the instructor specifically says that you can't access it. But the way that a test is structured, it limits the amount of time that you have to access those materials, and it depends on you being very familiar with those materials. So it won't just generally be asking for a definition that you find quickly on page 23 of your sociology textbook. The technology is your responsibility, and there may be glitches, so that's always something to expect in an online exam. So when you're preparing for an online exam, you really do have to study just as you would for a regular exam. It's a good idea to list what topics or concepts you need to know. This also gives you the chance to ask for clarification from your instructor as you're studying, which can be helpful too. You should be organizing and gathering your materials, assuming that you are permitted to use them. So your lecture notes, you want them to be organized. Maybe you've rewritten them so that they're easier to read. You've reduced some of that information to what you think is kind of the core information. For your textbook, it's always helpful to have sticky notes so that you can easily turn to different sections that you think are important, because again, you'll be asked to apply and analyze as opposed to just recalling information. And then if you've got your lecture slides, compiling the slides that you think have really key information on them and then organizing them according to topic. In some cases, it may be helpful to print that if that's something that is useful to you in how you learn and find information. So just thinking about how you organize yourself before an online exam can really help you to be successful.
I just really want to jump on that point, Loie.
Sure.
I have, I had 3 years worth of I had 3 years worth of open book on my computer exams that I could bring in everything. That was my entire experience throughout law school, and it's really helpful. But one of the things people often make the mistake of is having everything. So if you have your textbook, all the slides printed, maybe you have some other stuff that you have, your class notes, that's hundreds and thousands potentially of pages there. We would have situations in classes when we had 100 cases, and each of those cases is 20 pages, and you have to know the material from them. Well, I can't be searching through paragraph after paragraph to find the important information in the middle of the exam. You have to have that organized, and you have to make sure that you can find it quickly. And that's half the battle when it comes to these type of open book exams, is knowing where the material is in your notes, but knowing your notes so well that you're not spending 5 minutes just flipping pages trying to find it, that you can easily jump to where that's tabbed I used to make a table of contents. So I'd say if I was studying for torts, it would be negligence, the 6 cases. If it was duty of care, the 7 cases, standard of care, the 8 cases. So that way it's like, oh, the standard of care question. Okay, that's pages 45 to 65. Flip it open, bam, I'm right there. Really easy. That was a big part of studying for it, was making sure it's so organized that I wasn't wasting 10 minutes in the exam trying to find the answer, because I didn't have that 10 minutes. I had to use all of the full 3 hours that I had there. So it's a little different than it is otherwise, because professors expect almost a little bit more of your answers because they know you have the material there. And if you're spending all that time flipping through pages, you're not going to be answering the questions thoroughly.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I also just want to give a bit of a plug again for the Academic Learning Center, and I put the URL in the chat box there. They offer workshops online, and when we're back on campus, they offer them on campus on things like studying and preparing for different types of exams. So this information in part comes from them too. So if you want some more comprehensive help on this, you can access their website, attend their workshops, but also you can meet with a study skills tutor that can give you some tips and strategies for how to study for online exams too. So writing a take-home exam, we've already talked a little bit about take-home exams, but just some points to keep in mind, because these are exams that may be different from what you're used to if you have had experience with them. Many students have never had a take-home exam in the same sense, where you have a certain period of time that's longer than an hour or two to write the exam. So don't write more than you need to. Perfection is the enemy of done, as they say, right? You don't want to get everything absolutely perfect and then not be able to get to everything in your exam. So keep in mind the amount of time that you have and sort of think about what the expectation would be of you considering the amount of time that you have to write that exam. Pay close attention to the question and use it as your guide. A lot of times with a take-home exam, a student will kind of read the question and they forget about it and they go down a whole rabbit hole. And then in the end, they didn't actually answer the question. So always go back to the question to see what your instructor's asking. Use your sources effectively. So we've talked about this, whether it's lecture notes or articles or websites, but don't try to impress your instructor with having hundreds of resources. It's not even possible. Dozens of resources when they're just asking for a certain amount, or you know that you can get the information that you need from these 2 or 3 sources. Give yourself enough time and take breaks. So one of the benefits of a take-home exam is you don't have to sit down for 2 hours and just straight write. You have the time to process, and when you take breaks, it gives your brain the chance to sort of mull over ideas, and then you can return to your exam more effectively that way. Try to draft within a normal time limit. So get sort of your preliminary draft of what you want to do done, and say to yourself, okay, I would normally have an hour to do this. I'm just going to get the draft done in an hour, and then I will take time to refine it further. Save frequently, of course, especially when you're working on an exam online. If your internet goes out or something freezes, always a good idea. And then review and revise your answers as needed, without, again, striving for perfection, because it's going to prevent you from effectively finishing that exam.
Loie, I'm not sure if you saw the question there, but do you know how can international students get textbooks if they're not residing in Canada during the fall term? I think the first year center is probably the best way, but I honestly, I don't know. That's really tough, and that's a good point to bring up. And if Loie doesn't know, I just say reach out today to the first year center, or even the bookstore maybe.
If you're a U1 student, if you're not a U1 student, maybe reach out to an advisor in your faculty.
And they are a little behind right now just because there are a lot of questions about registration. So we email today or tomorrow and you'll get a response probably in a week or so, but it's before classes start at least.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Thanks for flagging that, Matt, because I missed it. Oh, and someone said, I know you can order books online through U of M. So you could also, there's possibility to get books delivered to you as well by ordering online, but it might not always be possible depending on the topic and if it's produced in large quantities and that type of thing. So yeah, ask an advisor. U of M bookstore is again another contact to ask about that too. So thanks to Taylor for mentioning that. just our last few slides here before we wrap up, because we only have a few minutes left, that we just want to go over really quick. We've already talked about most of these, but just to kind of leave you with a take-home message. You want to treat an online exam just like an in-person exam and assume that you're being watched, because you are. We've talked about the many ways that Learn and your instructor and faculties and departments can track your activity. If you consult any source, make sure that you're properly quoting, paraphrasing, and citing. So if you memorize information before an exam and then you include it without citation word for word, that's still plagiarism. Read the instructions very carefully. Don't ask your classmates if you're unsure about what the expectations are for an assignment or for an exam, because only your instructor can set that expectation. I know it's easier to ask a classmate, but also one of the benefits of this next semester being online is that you may be able to get to feel like you can communicate more frequently over email with your instructor. So take advantage of that. Work independently on your exams and assignments, and don't discuss your work with other students. So we've already talked about that, but just to flag that your instructor and faculties can identify when students have wording that matches, if the answer structures are the same, if 3 or 4 students get all the same kinds of questions wrong in the same pattern, that's another way that they tell. You shouldn't be reusing your previous exam answers or assignment answers unless your instructor says that you can do this and sort of build on your previous work, because again, as we mentioned earlier and someone in the chat mentioned, this is a form of self-plagiarism or a duplicate submission. Don't take pictures or screenshots of the exam. Unless your instructor is asking for proof of something, you should never be taking a picture of the exam, and especially never sending it to other students.
It is a very, very serious violation of academic integrity and misconduct to do that. Like, that is one of the most severe things that can happen. You're stealing information that's not yours and posting it elsewhere. Just like a textbook, just like a paper is owned by the person who wrote it, the exam is owned by the professor, and you do not have permission to post it elsewhere. It's just like one of those like big no-nos, and it's going to get people into a lot of trouble that they're not expecting.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like the bad guy in this scenario. Like, my role is to help students. I want to see you all succeed, but like, I hate to say it like this, but they will catch you. There's a 0% chance you get away with it. They will catch you, and it's going to be some very severe consequences with people that they're not expecting. Like I said, I don't like playing that role, and I don't want to be that person trying to scare people off in this presentation, but you'll get caught. Like, there's just a 0% chance you get away with it.
Yeah, and we're just trying to give you the information that you need so that you can avoid ending up in any of these unfortunate situations. And the last point here is that you should note that academic misconduct, so a case like plagiarism that's on a test in a testing environment, actually has higher penalties than on, say, an assignment. So even though it's a test, you might think the expectation isn't that you cite and reference, and that wouldn't be breaking a rule, it wouldn't be considered severe. But something like plagiarism on an exam can have a higher penalty than plagiarism on an assignment. So just keep that in mind too. And then I just wanted to end here with a screenshot. This is the academic integrity website. So there was somebody asking for our contact information. I just put my email in there, but you can also go to this website to get more information about what we've talked about today, and also my contact information is there. You'll also be able to find the contact information for the Student Advocacy and Case Management Office, which is where Matt is from. We're happy to answer any questions that we can. We hope that this presentation has been helpful for you. We also have a list of resources here, many that we've already mentioned. So we've got the Academic Advisors, Academic Learning Center, but don't forget about other supports for you too, like career services can be really helpful when you're trying to figure out your path and what kind of courses can help you with the credentials that will help you on the career that you want, financial aid and awards, health and wellness. There's many different aspects to being a successful student beyond just academics. But we hope that in sharing this information, this has helped to answer some of your questions and help you kind of enter the next semester with some confidence.
And if you
So
don't know who to talk to, reach out to someone. We're all very closely connected here at the university, and you'll get pointed
yeah,
in the right direction real quick. And so that way you can get connected with the people that can help you.
yeah, absolutely. And so we really wish you the best with your studies. And thank you everyone for your attention and your engagement.
And I think there's a question about finding a recording that Zach can probably answer better than Loie and I can.
Yeah, I can step in if you're both done. So thank you all again. Thanks, Matt and Loie, for taking the time and presenting for this session. And thank you to everyone who's here attending and listening in. The recording of the session will be posted to the Conversations for Success website. So if you just go to umanitoba.ca and search Conversations for Success, you'll find a list of upcoming programs there and all past recordings of previous sessions there as well. So with that, I will bid everyone adieu and have a wonderful afternoon.